Thanks to all of you who are here in person. Thanks to those who are here online or watching it in the nebulous future of YouTube. It's a pleasure to be here speaking about how we vote. There are plenty of arguments why to vote, but we found over the last several years, there have been more and more arguments about whether voting is secure, whether we can trust the counts, whether we can trust the ballots. And all of that doubt that's been sowed over the last several years has created distrust in the system. And if we can't trust the system and can't trust that our vote counts and votes that shouldn't count don't count, or votes that are counted in the right place go for the right candidate, well, then the whole system begins to creak. We're very lucky today to have two people who have extensive experience working in elections in Lake County, where we are located. The first is Anthony Vega, who is the county clerk for Lake County as of 2022. He calls himself a newbie, but he has extensive experience in elections, as he'll explain. And we also have Victoria Ratnaswamy, who is a past chair of Kol Hadash Humanistic Congregation, who's convening this conversation. And she also has extensive experience both registering voters, which will be part of what we talk about, as well as being an election judge, site manager, and plenty of other important tasks that are part of the election machinery. And myself, I'm Rabbi Chalom of Kol Hadash. I also work as an election judge, but only since 2020. I figured I was younger, I was healthier, I should take the risk and serve as an election judge in that election. And I've had the chance to work in a number of different precincts in a limited way, but I found that ever since I moved to Chicago, I followed the local maxim of voting early and voting often, at least once per election. But in primaries and in regular elections as well, it's an important part of being part of your community to make sure your voice is counted. So I'm glad that we have this opportunity to hopefully reassure people or provide answers to some of those questions and challenges that have come up over whether the vote is trustworthy. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anthony.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, everyone, for inviting me, for welcoming me. Really, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. As the Rabbi mentioned, I am the new Lake County Clerk as of December of 2022. However, back when I was in high school, I was a student election judge for 2 election cycles. During graduate school, I volunteered to be an election site coordinator for the Chicago Board of Elections during the 2016 general primary. And since being in Lake County and at the end of 2016, I've served as a poll watcher for almost every single election before deciding to run for the top election job. So as clerk, I am in charge of the voter registration and the conduct of elections in the county. And I think when we're talking, should I actually give the mic to Victoria to introduce herself?
Go on into yours. And then...
Okay. I think one of the pieces that makes us strong in Illinois when it comes to election administration is our bottom-up approach to election administration. In many different states, elections are run by the Secretary of State or a statewide agency. That's not the case in Illinois. That rests at the local level with the county clerks. We have 102 counties. 101 of those counties, the chief election authority is the county clerk. One county has a countywide board of election commissioners, and 6 municipalities have a municipal board of elections. So we have 108 election authorities in the state, which means that while we follow the state election code, and that is what governs how we approach the job, the procedures, the equipment, the systems, the how, the people are completely left at the local level, which means that for somebody to, a bad actor trying to infiltrate and overturn an election is extremely difficult in the state of Illinois, because to successfully do that for a statewide race, you have to successfully infiltrate all 108. That being said, every single election authority does have many different checks and balances. We have very strong cybersecurity measures, and there will be more information that I will go into detail. But as we get involved into this conversation, I think it's really, it's important to have that basic understanding of how Illinois governs elections. So with that, I'll turn it over to Victoria.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Victoria Ratnaswamy, and I think I first became involved in this process about 25 years ago. I was teaching government to high school students here in Lake County at Stevenson High School. And at the time, a law had just changed so that 17-year-olds could be trained and serve as election judges. So we started, that was probably 3 county clerks ago, had people train kids after school to learn how to do this process. So that's how I first, I think, got involved in it, and have, then we started doing early voting, and so over time, I think I've seen many changes. When I first started, we didn't have computers. We had those flip books, and we flipped to the voter's name. And then, as the processes have changed, things have become, in my view, very streamlined. They've really improved. There have been many improvements. A lot of those have been in response to input from voters, from employees of the county, from judges. And so there's been a lot of great improvements. One thing I will say is that, all politics are local, right? So all elections are local. And uh, increasingly, people are getting information from national sources or from social media sources. And so they'll hear something either online or on a national broadcast about voting and what's going to happen and what to expect and how it works. But it doesn't necessarily apply to them in their local communities. What are the requirements for ID, for example, when you're going to vote? Well, that depends. And often the answer is that depends where you live. And that can be an unsettling answer for people, uh, especially if it doesn't match what they heard or what somebody told them. So so that's one challenge that we've found over time. And another is just when all the changes, even when they're good, and some of them are more just neutral. Your polling place used to be there, and now your polling place is here. So it's not really good or bad, but any change kind of rattles people. But what we've seen more recently is much more rattling from some simple changes. This most recent primary in March in Illinois, we had all new equipment, new procedures. Our county clerk did a phenomenal job putting it in place, and especially putting it in place during a more slow election. We do not have lines around the building in this particular primary. So we got to learn how to really use it and all the different situations that come up in real life. And I feel like we're much better suited for the presidential election coming up, which will be much more fast paced. And we want to get people, we want to do it all right and quickly. So, you get those questions and concerns about, I've had people hold their ballot over the drop box, and they're nervous. Are you sure this is going to be counted? And I understand. I mean, I understand the feeling. And even in the ballot box, are these going to really count? Where do these really go, and how does it work? So those are the questions that come up over and over. If you have to vote provisionally, just the word puts people on edge. Just for the record, the provisional votes are counted if they are valid votes. So this is the kind of stuff we've worked through, and I think it has been more intensified because people are getting more, even if there wasn't increased suspicion, there's increased information that doesn't apply to you. So I'm going to let you go ahead.
Go ahead, So as I mentioned, the first election that I worked was November of 2020, which was an unusual election beyond all other elections. We had to wear PPE the entire time. We were actually stationed in Ravinia, which I had not been to all summer because it had been closed. And on one hand, it was beautiful to walk in and see the lawn pristine. I don't know if they mowed it just for us, but it looked fantastic. But of course, it was also eerie because it was so empty. And then people began filing into the theater where they had set up the polling places. There was a long sort of snaking line to provide space for people to vote. But what really brought home to me how important the work that we were doing was one voter who had parked in the handicapped spot, but it was still maybe a several yards walk to get to the entrance. And she had a caregiver with her and a walker and was walking painfully slowly, but it was very, very important for her to vote. Now, I had just been trained, and so the manual was fresh in my mind. And I realized there's a way we could take the ballot to her. If we had two election judges who were not from the same party, either not aligned or from different parties, we could take the ballot to where she was, whether it was in her car, or in this case, we brought a chair out onto the walkway and she sat down, and we made it possible for her to vote. I don't know if she was able to vote in this last primary. I don't know if she's still around even, but voting in that election was vitally important for her, and we were able to make that possible. And that's why on some level, we might take some of these objections to voting security personally, because people who work as election judges, I remember in every training I've been in, people who are new judges say, wow, this is really secure. The more they learn about what's involved in registering people and verifying the registrations and managing the system so that it can't be hacked from the outside, they become more confident in how the votes are, simply because they're the ones running it, and they realize that there are all these safeguards in place to make it plausible. And that's why this program was organized both by Kol Hadash and with a grant from our National Society for Humanistic Judaism through their initiative called Jews for a Secular Democracy. They wanted to be able to run programs in various places that would inform voters about why their voting is secure and why a lot of that rumor mill that has been out there is really not reliable. So I thought maybe it'd be worth talking a little bit more about some of those challenges that you might have heard of out there, those myths that have been promulgated, and why they're just not true. In the Humanistic Jewish congregation, we like to rely on evidence and reason and what makes sense. Well, this is another case where we need to apply that tool of human intellect and realize that reasonable minds have worked on this project to make it safe, and that's why it is.
That is a really good tee up to the next topic. And look, I mentioned one of the strengths is that Illinois has a bottom-up approach to election administration. Another strength in Illinois is the fact that we still have the paper ballot. There's been a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of, certain things are being taken out of context. A lot of different jurisdictions in many different states rely on a touchscreen ballot marking devices. And what that does is, for one, the local election authority doesn't have to pre-print ballots. And the ballot that prints out is usually a summary of the selection of the voter. So it is those devices that bring in a lot of concern to a lot of different people. Illinois, though, we rely on the paper ballot. Regardless of the tabulation system in use, we can always reproduce the results with the paper ballot. And we keep the ballots, election material for 22 months after the election. So there's always any questions as to the outcome, we can always, again, reproduce the results. Because really, election judges, poll watchers, the candidates, the election staff, I see it as, we're the custodians of our democracy. And when we conduct elections for people, we uplift the values of fairness and transparency so that everyone who's eligible to vote can vote, to ensure that we maintain that, the principles upon which our nation was founded, right? That the will of the people is at the forefront of our governance. And so that's why we take a lot of people like Victoria and the Rabbi step up to serve, and why we also take great care in making sure that we can show our work. And so that leads me to the next topic along the same lines is, right, the voting system. There's been a lot of things across the nation said about systems like Dominion and ES&S and the different tabulation systems that we have. Lake County doesn't use Dominion 1. But when we're talking about voting system, we're talking about how the ballot is created. the layout of the ballot, how the ballot is entered into the tabulation system. And for all of you voters that are watching, it is the ugly black and gray box where you insert your ballots. That is an optical scan machine. When you when you feed your ballot through, it takes an optical scan of your ballot. The ballot drops at the bottom. At the end of the night, once voting is closed, the election judges take the ballots, put them in boxes, they seal them, and then they tabulate the results from the optical scan. After the election, the State Board of Elections lets us know which 5% of precincts we have to retabulate. So we retabulate to make sure that the results that we release on election night are consistent with that retabulation. That is the voting system. That is separate from the system that you are checked in through when you come into the polling site. That's completely separated, and they're not connected together. But Illinois has a very strict certification process for these voting systems, which can take multiple different years. The Illinois State Board of Elections has a list of which systems are approved for use in Illinois. For a vendor to successfully achieve certification takes years, takes a lot of money, and they have to go through very strict testing before they are even allowed for local use by the election authorities. Here in Lake County, we use ES&S. It's been in use for over 10 years. I am the 4th county clerk to be working with ES&S, and has been consistently used since it was implemented here. And so that is a quick, overview of the voting systems, the certification process, a little quick summary of the checks and balances after the election. But I also want to point out that losing candidates, for example, if they lost within 5 percentage points, can request a discovery recount, where they can inspect all the equipment that was used in 25% of the precincts within their race. So we separate all the equipment. They can inspect it. They can inspect the tapes from election day. They can inspect the vote by mail applications from voters. They can inspect the ballots themselves. We can retabulate it for them. And we can also hand count the ballots for them to make sure that the hand count is consistent with the tabulation. Last year, during the April 2023 consolidated election, there was one candidate that requested a discovery recount. She lost by 17 votes. And so we, in her request, 25% of the precincts for that district, I believe there were 6 precincts that we had to recount by hand. And so we set up a system, we called it election judges. It took us half a day to count 6 precincts by hand. There's a movement out there to go back to hand counting. Let me tell you, hand counting is not efficient. And imagine how many times you're going to have to recount different ballots for different races, because a person can double count. And every time that happens, you have to restart again. There are 2 jurisdictions in other states where their county board voted to ban a tabulation system. So they're telling their county clerk, you will count every election from now on by hand. So what ended up happening? The county clerk left. The director of elections left, because you're not going to find good people, because they know that they're being set up to fail. And so on the other hand, in Illinois, we're very lucky to have voters and professional election staff that can continue to uphold the highest standards of election systems. So that's a very quick overview of that process. Victoria, to you.
Recount change anything?
No. In fact, even though it took us half a day to count all 6 precincts, an hour in, the candidate said, Yeah, it's very clear to me nothing's going to change. But they brought their team, and so their team was still going at it. And so the candidate completely disengaged and went into the lobby and did their thing. But that's again, it's very costly. We had to call in about 12 to 15 election judges. We had to bring in all the material from our warehouse. We had to take half of our election staff to work this discovery recounts. And now discovery recounts, even if there was something that changed, it doesn't automatically change the outcome of the election. The candidate then has to petition the court to order a full recount, and it will be the court that then decides whether to uphold the election results or not.
So you had just taken a sample of the ballots to check that count, and it was exactly right.
Correct. Do you have anything to add on this one?
No, I think I was going to talk about like information.
Okay.
Disbursement, if that's. So over time in my experience, I think what I found is one of the best ways to just reassure people is having informed voters. So one of the things that I started doing is that I go to some high schools in Lake County regularly to register the students. And there are some rules that on first hearing them, it might sound confusing. It's not. But for example, we all think of when you are 18, you can register and vote. But there's a little more to it. If you are going to be 18 by the time of a general November election, but at the primary in the spring, you're only 17, you can vote in that primary. You can register and vote in that primary as a 17-year-old. So that's the kind of thing. And then when I go to the high schools, I made this, it shows some old school, I made 3 on a page and I cut them and I give them to the student when they register to vote. And then they tell me they'll just take a picture of it. Because that's not what we do anymore. We don't take slips of paper, but I made them anyway. And I have things like, because I don't want to just say, okay, you're registered to vote, congratulations, and go on your way. I want them to have a little information about now what? How do I find out what will be on my ballot? Where do I vote? When do I vote? How do I find out? How could I request one in the mail? A lot of the students are seniors in high school and they're not going to be at home in the fall election. So we have a fantastic feature on the Lake County. It's called Voter Power on the Lake County website where you log in. First of all, am I even registered? Is another question. Like maybe you have to register every time. I know that that's not the case, but why you wouldn't automatically know that if you're new to this. So it allows them to log in. Am I really registered? They can look at all the dates. When is early voting? Where is early voting? What is my polling place on election day? And then you can look at the exact ballot for your, especially in a local election where you're in this precinct and this township and this city council, this school board, that those are all overlapping, can be overlapping districts. So you can look at the exact ballot that will apply to you. And especially when there are ballot questions, like school bond issues, the wording takes, I would think we could all agree, more than one read to understand yes or no, what am I really voting for? So seeing all of that, I feel like the more we can familiarize people with the system, how it works, yes, but how to find out all of this information. And it won't fix all the confusion. Sometimes people come in and they think they're going to vote, and we look in the system and say, oh, you requested a ballot in the mail. And they don't realize that they actually signed up for repeated ballots in the mail. They thought they only did it for one time. So that's the kind of thing. The other amazing feature is that if you request a ballot in the mail, you can either obviously mail it in or drop it off. You can track it on the website. Has it been received by the county? Has it been cast? This is the kind of, all of this information that's available to people, I feel like can really allay some of these concerns when you really see how it works and how much you can find out in advance. And especially, I feel like local elections have a lot of, who are these people on the ballot? There's a park district, a library board. How do I find out information about these people? But when they ask me as an election judge, it's, first of all, that they've asked my opinion. There's no opinion giving on candidates by election judges. That would be a real problem. So but the more we can sort of disseminate all these abilities and all of these features, I think that really, and share it with everybody, that I think really helps to have a secure system and a sense of confidence that we have this good, solid system that works. That's what
I'll add something very quick. Illinois has we have plenty of options. We can vote early. We can vote by mail, no excuse, no longer needed. We can sign up for permanent vote by mail. And, sometimes all of those options can lead to some unintended confusion on the part of the voter, especially if the voter is an inconsistent voter. And so I think it's incumbent upon not only the civic organizations, but also the local election authority, the county clerk, to look at different ways to help educate voters and make the information easy to find and easy to navigate. And that's a challenge that is always going to be a challenge, and we have to also look at different mediums as to how we reach people, especially in the age of social media, where people and young adults are attached to their phones. But again, these options enable the voters to be able to cast their ballot in a way that we didn't have before. When I was in college, one of the qualifying reasons to get a vote by mail was if you were away in college. You had to have an excuse. I think it was 2015, 2014, maybe, when that went away. So we're getting better, but by getting better, then there's a lot for the voter to digest.
So I'm actually going to turn it right back to you, Anthony, with a question. One of the things that happens to me a dozen times every time I've been an election judge is somebody walks up and pulls out their wallet to take out their picture ID because they assume that you need a picture ID to vote. And historically, Illinois has not required picture ID to vote. They just require a signature that then is verified with the signature on record, which does have its challenges, particularly as people get older and they registered 30 years ago and they have, hand tremor issues or other challenges with the signature. But the issue of picture ID and verifying the identity of the person who's voting has been one of those pressure points that people who want to undermine confidence in election have been pushing on over the last several years. And I wonder if you would talk for a little bit about that question of verifying voter identity, picture or otherwise, as part of the security process for the elections.
That's an excellent question. So you're right. Illinois does not require photo ID when you go vote. In fact, we legally cannot ask for an ID. By asking, we are potentially disenfranchising some. They tend to be lower income, people of color. In Illinois, like you said, we verify their identity with a signature. Now, one of the best features of our new check-in system, the e-poll book, is that we'll be able now to update all of the signatures of those who have voted, so we can then keep track of how their signature changes over time. Because you're right, if you first registered 20, 30 years ago, your signature is not going to look the same. And what that means when you're going to vote is, well, you may get challenged. You may get challenged by a judge. You may get challenged by a poll watcher. And that is not a good experience for the voter, even though the Illinois Election Code outlines the procedures on how to handle those signature and signature challenges. but there's still a very strong argument by a lot of people that photo ID is the best way. Now, when people ask me my opinion about that, I give the answer is I have to, regardless of how I feel about it, I have to follow the law. Illinois doesn't allow me to ask for ID. But then I ask them, well, we're all older people. Raise your hand if maybe at some point you had an ID that was not really reflective of your name and or age back in the day. There is never going to be a foolproof system. There's always, however we're identifying a person's identity, there's always going to be, those that will try to circumvent the system. But what you should know is that, you have the checks and balances with the challenges. You can, if there's a signature challenge, then the voter has to provide a picture ID, for example, right? Which most people, give their driver's license, which has their photo ID, their name, and the same signature that we're comparing against, ideally. So it's not about what foolproof method that we're using. It's rather making sure that we have the right checks and balances to make sure that the person who's standing in front of the election judges is the right and eligible voter so that they can cast their ballot.
Honestly, the biggest challenge I've run into with signatures is that because it's on a screen, people think it's a Starbucks receipt and they just do this. And then you have to say to them, no, you really have to sign it like you're signing a legal document. And then it'll more often match. Although sometimes their chicken scratch is exactly the same as what's on file because now they register on a screen. And so they're using their screen signature both to register and to vote. Well, I do want to make sure we have time for comments or questions from either our in-person audience or our online audience. If you do have something you want to ask, I'd ask that you use the mic that's standing over there just so that the online people can hear the question that's being asked. I don't know how long the cord is. David, if you want to try and pass it around, you can. Might just be easier to go to, it's a corded mic, yes, old fashioned. But we want to make sure we have time to ask comments or questions. I did have one last general question to ask Victoria and Anthony. I shared a story of a really inspiring moment for me in working as an election judge, and I'm curious if you have a memory of a particular moment or voter or election that really impacted you and made you realize this is why I'm doing it and this is why it's so important.
So during my free time, I am actually a volunteer teacher. I teach citizenship classes for immigrants that want to become a U.S. citizen. And so those moments that you speak of, Rabbi, is when they successfully pass their citizenship interview and they become citizens. And then they text me or get a hold of me and said, guess what? I just received my voter registration card from you in the mail. That's why I do what I do, is what's really propelled me into public service, because my parents, again, my parents were immigrants, and so I'm first generation, and so I have never missed an election. I've always voted, which is a bit out of the norm for people in my age group, but I vote because I have family that can vote. I have friends and neighbors that can't vote. And so I feel very strongly that that is my duty. And I'm now able to continue in passing that on with my volunteerism. And it's those moments when they successfully pass their citizenship exam with USCIS and they're registered to vote that, really put things into perspective.
I love that. That is great. And I think the same in registering people whenever it's a new citizen who's super excited about it, or any student, that's always really like a very positive, good experience. You really feel like you're doing something. And I would say the other thing is helping. I don't know if I have a couple particular instances I can think of people who had sort of complicated situations. And one person in particular, a couple of elections ago, came in early voting, and she was an unhoused person, and she came in and she had a driver's license. She had a car. She was paying her car insurance. She was paying for her car, but not every job is paying enough that she also was able to afford housing, which was really, sad to hear. And so it was a little more complicated because her license had a PO box. So so I got in touch with but I sort of wasn't going to give up, and neither was she. And I said, it's early voting. We have time you will vote. So I called the clerk's office at the time, and we worked out a system of the person. She was staying on someone's couch, got a letter signed. We worked out different things, and her identity wasn't in question. What you're looking for is, one address in the county, one vote yes, well, yes, to make that part of it work. But when you help people through sort of these more complicated situations, that take a little time, a little patience, it really makes you realize, like, this is, that this mattered, and you didn't just say, sorry, I don't think we can help you.
So I'll ask those who are online, if you have a comment or question, to type it in the chat, and I'm happy to pass it along to our panelists. If anyone's here, the microphone is there if you have a comment or question. Ed, did you want to? Okay.
I have a couple of questions, but one is I did not realize this top-down, bottom-up procedure in terms of voting. How many states in the country have the bottom-up versus the top-down way of managing voting?
So the vast majority of states have a top-down approach. Illinois is in the minority in terms of the bottom-up approach. I can't remember the exact number, but it's the majority are top-down.
And my other question is, I've done some curing of votes in other places. Do you have a vote curing process for people who have absentee ballot and they maybe have some problems with how they've they filled out their ballot?
Yeah, so Holly asked a very specific question. What does curing a ballot mean? So curing a ballot is, let's a voter, you request your vote by mail ballot, you fill it out, you send it back. But let's say you forget to sign the voter's affidavit on the return envelope, or let's say you gave your credit card signature, which does not match our your voter registration record in our office. So when that happens, we notify the voter that their vote by mail ballot cannot be cast as is because we're missing a signature or the signature doesn't match. They have to cure their ballot. And so the process in Lake County is when we send them that notification, we attached a voter's affidavit that they have to fill out and return to us no later than 14 days after the election. Now, in Lake County, we don't have curing issues as other large or similarly sized counties. I think for the general election, we had a few hundred. I would argue that one is too many. But that really puts the onus on the voter. And so my office actually is right now working through a way to make that much more, to relying on technology to make that more seamless so they don't have to go through the hassle of, okay, now I got to print this out. Well, I got to sign this. I got to find an envelope and I got to return it. I got to check with the clerk's office to make sure they received it. And so we're working on making that more efficient. But that's what curing a ballot means.
We got a nice comment from online saying that Ron really appreciates receiving texts to confirm the receipt of his mail-in ballot as one more way and a technology current way to let people know, and again, to give them that confidence that voting, even if they didn't see it go in a box or see it go in the machine, it's still being counted and taken seriously. Ed.
Hi, I've worked as an election judge, I think 12 elections now. And I have a couple of concerns. One of the main ones is, and I've heard this from other people, without requiring an ID, you have to be a citizen to vote. There is very little control over non-citizens being able to register. Anybody can give their information. All they have to do is sign saying, I'm a citizen. And it's so easy that I'm concerned, and other people are concerned, that there's going to be an effort to bring in people who are not citizens, pay them $5 or $10 to go in and register and to vote.
Another very good question. Look, your concerns are valid. Illinois, again, in Illinois, you have to satisfy the registration requirements. And when the voter or the new registrant is doing that, they're doing that under the penalty of perjury. They're doing that under the penalty of being prosecuted. If they are not a U.S. citizen and they're trying to illegally register, when they go through the green card process or they're trying to go through the citizenship process, they are putting that in jeopardy. They're putting themselves in a position where not only they will be deported, but they will also be giving up the opportunity of becoming a U.S. citizen. Now, Illinois, there's many different ways to register. You can register with the deputy registrar. You can register at the Department of Motor Vehicle, the DMV, under the Secretary of State. You can register online. I cannot say that there has never been a non-U.S. citizen that's been registered, because when Illinois went to automatic voter registration at the DMV, the Illinois Secretary of State's office had a few incidents where non-U.S. citizens were automatically registered to vote. Over the last few years, all of the election authorities and the Illinois Secretary of State took many drastic efforts to make sure to rectify that. Again, this is one of those things where we have to balance the rights of voters versus in making sure that non-U.S. citizens are eligible to vote. But again, we, under Illinois law currently, they are, a registrant is attesting that they are a U.S. citizen. If we find out, there's been times within my office since my tenure where I've referred to the state's attorney or to another jurisdiction, possible prosecution, because of, it may not necessarily be that they were undocumented person registered, but for other different reasons, including that topic, is that we will prosecute because, again, we want to make it easy for citizens, but if bad actors are doing that, then it is our job to prosecute that to the fullest extent of the law.
How many have you prosecuted?
We've helped other jurisdictions prosecute. I will say that ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center, is a national database. It's a data sharing system where the member states share information about people that are transient mostly, that potentially voted in multiple different jurisdictions. Very few cases. Again, it's not a concerted effort. They're usually very isolated. But what happens in Lake County is people go to states like Florida when they retire, and they never update their voter registration. So they have an active voter registration in Illinois, and then they have an active registration in Florida. And so then, hey, they vote in Florida and they're visiting grandbaby, and maybe they want to try and vote here. Very isolated, very few. And so when we get hits back, we've actually helped other jurisdictions. We got to determine where the crime occurred, which means where did the voter actually vote? So if they voted, in the couple instances, they voted here first, which means the crime didn't occur here. The crime happened in the other jurisdiction where they voted, and so those were prosecuted by the other jurisdictions. But we have a very good cooperation with other jurisdictions. But under my tenure, I believe there was one prosecution, but under previous administrations, I can't say. But we do, the Lake County State's Attorney does a very good job investigating every single potential instance.
Help voting, but that avoids my question of non-citizens being prosecuted for voting.
In Lake County, we have not had an instance of a non-US citizen being prosecuted. I think that answers.
So the Heritage Foundation, which is, I think everyone knows, a conservative group, is trying to catch in a database every case of proven voter fraud in the United States going back to the year 2020. They only have 1,499 cases out of billions of votes. And of those 1,499, going back to the year 2020, only 80 are non-citizens voting. It is so rare.
Well, the other thing that is worth thinking about, and again, this is drawing on the question of reason. We already have an issue with undocumented people not wanting to have contact with the authorities, not wanting to report crimes to the police, not wanting to rely on emergency services, ERs and those kind of things. And so to put yourself intentionally in a place where you're signing your name, might have to show your identification in a government process, seems unlikely that somebody would risk that. They're much more likely to be hiding from the authorities than they are to be putting themselves in that position. And that's, anecdotal, rational thinking rather than actual data, but it makes sense. And this is one of those issues that, again, is often brought up as a hypothetical, what could be, but doesn't actually turn out to be something that happens as often as you hear about it. So this is a case where it's good to be vigilant, but have to be realistic. And the other challenge to this process, whether it's picture ID or non-citizens voting, is in theory, we could have a foolproof system called biometric identification, where your fingerprint, your iris scan, a rapid DNA test, who knows what, where you verify, look, we could microchip everybody too, right? That way you would have absolute confidence that your barcode was scanned in on your way into the poll and you're exactly who you say you are. But I don't know that we want to live in a world like that. The privacy concerns and surveillance concerns would be part of that world too. I'm much more comfortable with the system we have than a foolproof system that would have other challenges along with it. So I wanted to ask if anyone else has a question, either here or online, before we get to our closing thoughts.
I'll just say something if I could. Two things. First, I think I wanted to emphasize, I'm also an election judge, so that the difficulty would be to cheat. There's this idea that somehow there's thousands of people, being counted, ballots being harvested and all this. And having done early voting for the first time this last election, there are security seals that get changed every day. Different people come in, check the numbers. Different election judges are going through the system, and we're all checking these numbers and making sure things are being picked up every day. They're being processed every day at the clerk's office. It would take the most massive conspiracy of everybody involved. I mean, in order to pull off something like this. Even the sheets of paper we use to test the printers had to be kept in order to check that the number of ballot pieces that have been used are actually all there. And so, if the numbers don't match, we had a situation where I was, where we had the tabulator got stuck. And so instead of just opening it up and pushing the ballot in, which is what we should have done, the lady who was the election judge was doing it kept trying to reinsert it. So we ended up scanning it 3 times, so we were off by 3 for the entire 2 weeks, but this was a constant, they kept saying, why are you up by 3? And it comes up on each poll book, the numbers that are actually being calculated, registered versus how many are being tabulated. And all these things have to be checked. The other thing I just want to say is the biggest problem where my approach to election judging is that we want to make sure that everybody who's eligible has a chance to vote. And we will do everything we can in order to make that happen. And we had a very old lady come in whose signature didn't match. And she also had moved within the precinct. And the difficulty was getting two pieces of identification that had the address on it, the new address on it. And that a lot of people don't have that. And that's where we've often run into this kind of sticking point. And I kind of wish that more, not only the judges, but the voters would educate themselves as to what they need when they have these sorts of new registrations that they have to do. It would make it much simpler. But, you know, she went home, and this lady was like 90, and she went home and she got more identification. She came back and we kept going through it. And eventually it took like an hour, but she got her vote, you know, and she got a regular vote. And that's, to us, we felt like this is important that she got a chance to do this. But anyway, I think what Anthony is doing with the website is excellent, because if people will look at it, it's more and more the information is there exactly as to what they need to do and what they have to bring to the voting site. One last thing, if I might. A lot of people seem to think that the voting card is their good ID, and it's not. And it doesn't always match. The precincts aren't always the same. They change. And I wish people would understand that better. Maybe there's something that could be done when they receive it. I don't know. So.
So I wanted to start to bring things to a close with just a couple of thoughts. The first was I had to take the opportunity to offer one complaint. I want my pins. What happened to the pins? As election judges used to get a pin for every election, you'd have people that have pins up and down. Half of the conversation between the election judges the last election, where are our pins? We want our pins. So I'm just registering the complaint. You can make your decision, budgeting and everything else. I mean, in the choice of budgeting between having the new machinery, having a reliable website, you know, I understand the pins are low on the list, but I do think that that's a little perk that I miss at least. But the last thing I wanted to share is one of the positive experiences of voting had nothing to do with the voters. It has to do with the time you spend with the other election judges, particularly in a primary election. There's a lot of dead time because there aren't as many voters, particularly with not uncontested, but minimally contested primaries, even on the national ballot for this election, let alone an off-year ballot and so on. And half the time people come in, they don't even realize it's a primary where you have to pick a party. Well, why do you need to know what party I am? They're very suspicious. So there's a lot of time to talk with the other judges. And what I love about talking with the other judges is, first of all, they're civic-minded people who they get paid, but they're really volunteering their time. And it's a long, long day. They want to help people be part of the democratic process. And I never know which of the other judges are registered with which party. We're interested in public affairs. We sometimes will talk about them, you know, when there's no voters present. We make sure we're very careful about that. I only bring National Geographic magazines to read, so there's nothing dangerous in there. But I love the fact that I'm talking with these other civic-minded people. We don't know what the other person's perspective is. I might guess you're there, but we're all on the same team and we're all working for the same end, which is to have a free and fair and reliable and trustworthy election. And that's really inspiring. And I find even when I have neighbors whom I know who come in to vote in my precinct, and I know their perspective is very different from mine, but I take getting them a ballot as seriously as I would anybody else. And so does everyone else who's working there as an election judge. If more of our society functioned like the election judges function that I've experienced working as a judge, society would get along much better. So that's my positive takeaway from election working, not only confidence in the voting, but confidence in other voters. I find that really inspiring. So I wanted to know if you, either of you wanted to offer any last sort of closing thoughts.
Let me address your complaint head on. The pin is back. So when you got trained, you would get a pin, and there would be a presidential pin for November. As a newly elected clerk, I was trying to find ways to be efficient with our budget, and so I made the mistake. You know, it made sense logically to get rid of the pin, but let me tell you, the backlash was so severe that I receive the message loud and clear, and I make an effort to always be as much as possible in the community, and that includes walking in many different parades. And so it was the Buffalo, it was one of the Buffalo Grove parades. It was after Labor Day, almost a year since being elected, and I'm shaking hands along the street, and one of them, somebody says, I'm one of your election judges. Bring back the pin. And Congressman Brad Schneider was walking behind me, and he later, as we were walking away, he said, "I don't know what you did, but you need to bring the pin back because clearly they feel very strongly about it." And so we did. I recognize that creates community, and as a newly elected official, I maybe didn't see the value, and so I recognized that mistake, and we brought it back. And so I think that was the quickest. I think that's the quickest complaint, problem solving right there. But look, these are my final thoughts. Is we can't do this without the help of regular voters. It is up to regular voters to combat mis and disinformation, to amplify messaging from the actual source. And I think social media is not helping that everything is shareable, and it's messaged in a way where it's going to evoke a strong reaction, pro or against. It may not be accurate, but I think it behooves all of us to really take a second to really evaluate, is this the right messaging? I think, again, the turnout is a strength of our democracy. I think, as I mentioned, custodians were responsible for making sure that people vote. But I know that the issue was brought up about photo ID and non-citizens from registering and voting. But the very real concerns that really keep me up at night are election day disruptions, are the fact that a lot of my colleagues are receiving fentanyl-laced mail to their offices. We had in Lake County so-called First Amendment auditors coming with video, trying to video record election judges and voters. Those are very real threats that have already arrived on our doorstep, in addition to unregulated artificial intelligence, which I think if we don't regulate it, it can truly create generational damage to our democracy. Imagine, and we saw this in the primary in New Hampshire, where Democratic voters, received an AI-generated phone call with President Joe Biden's voice discouraging them to vote. That's real. That's already here. Now imagine, because my likeness, my voice is already public. Imagine an AI-generated video going out to Lake County saying election day is canceled or your polling site has changed, and sending them to a location that's not an actual voting site. Those are very real threats. And so I think a lot of election authorities, and us included, have started coordinating much more closely with law enforcement in taking that approach, because what's on the horizon is quite frankly a bit frightening sometimes. But if we have good partners, civic partners like Call Hadash, other groups that are willing to, join us and not, spread mis and disinformation, but rather do what we're doing here, is to help educate voters. I think that is a bright spot in for us as a country as a whole. Other than that, I will always offer, if your congregation would like to have a tour of our vote by mail processing center, we can definitely coordinate that. I know vote by mail is another topic that we really didn't delve too far deep, but if there's always questions, we can give you a tour. We can showcase the different quality control checkpoints, the audit, the security controls, because Yes, we take very strong, we've been very intentional about maintaining chain of custody over vote by mail ballots, ensuring that we, again, going back to, when you were in school, show your work. We can show our work in Lake County and in Illinois, and I know that a lot of my colleagues are working very hard. And lastly, I want to thank all the election judges because, well, we couldn't run elections without you. One, and two is you're in the front lines, and sometimes you get the good and the bad, and sometimes you just have to roll with it. But again, thank you for the invitation, and I really enjoyed being here.
Thank you so much for coming. And now I feel like after hearing the inspiration, I was actually going to say something about the importance of the stickers, which go to every voter, which they want the sticker. And that includes people who came in to just drop off their ballot. So we can never, I just want to say publicly, we can never not have the stickers. This year there was a design contest for the stickers. They were designed by a student. They were really great. So they were something new. But I think really what I take from this and always is to spread good information and to direct people to direct sources, and remind your friends to vote, and just to watch your sources, I guess, is really the answer, but to really help to clarify and send people to where they can get good information, I think.
I've heard it said that every election official roots for the same thing in every election, a landslide. Because then there's no dispute. But obviously, we are also rooting for as many voters as possible to make their voice heard and to have their vote counted. So again, I want to thank those who came. Thank Jews for a Secular Democracy for helping to support this program. Thank Hadash for hosting. Good night. And remember, vote early and vote as often as legal.